All right, everyone. Hello, and welcome to Skeptical Inquirer Presents. As you know, this is a series of live online presentations from experts who are devoted to advancing science over pseudoscience, media literacy over conspiracy theories, and critical thinking over magical thinking. I'm your host, Leanne Ford. I am also a stand-up comedian, and my comedy special, Even More Funny Women of a Certain Age, ahem, is now streaming on Apple TV. And I am delighted that I had the pleasure of meeting some of you in person last week at the Scope Centennial Conference in Chattanooga, co-sponsored by the Freedom from Religion Foundation and the Center for Inquiry. I got to have some lovely conversations with several of you throughout the weekend. It was fantastic. I had a great time, and I'm looking forward to doing it again in another 100 years. So go Team Enlightenment. Now, folks, it is hard to deny the growing cultural rift between traditional institutions and a rapidly expanding landscape of paranormal. So tonight's guest on Skeptical Inquirer Presents is Matthew Hongoltz-Hetling. And I realize right now that I did not confirm with him that I was pronouncing his name correctly. So fingers crossed that I have done that. In his latest book, The Ghost Lab, which I have around here somewhere. Yes, thank you, Barry, for sending this to me. The Ghost Lab, How Bigfoot Hunters, Mediums, and Alien Enthusiasts Are Wrecking, Absolutely Wrecking Science. And Matt examines how widespread distrust in science, government, and media has grown in supernatural thinking and empowered a new class of paranormal entrepreneurs that further spread that distrust. And at stake here is not just what we believe, but how we decide what counts as truth. Now, tonight, Matt will explain how belief in the paranormal is evolving into a dominant worldview, one that increasingly competes with evidence-based systems for public trust. He uses a blend of storytelling, humor, and hard data to challenge skeptics to thinking differently about belief and to consider what a more inclusive, resilient version of scientific and civil life might look like. Woo! Challenge accepted. Now, my friends, if you are joining us live, you have the opportunity to ask questions about tonight's presentation by typing them into the Q&A box. And you know the drill. We'll get to as many of them as we can that are relevant and on topic. And so now, Skeptical Inquirer presents Matthew Hongoltz-Hetling. Sir, the stage is all yours.
Leanne, what an amazing introduction. This is how we know you're a pro. You can just look at my name and Hongoltz-Hetling trips off of your tongue so delightfully. If you are ever collecting people for slightly funny skeptics of a certain age, please call me. Please call me.
Noted.
So now, shall I get this presentation going? We're gonna share my screen. All right, folks can see that? All right, I hope so. All right, so the world is changing. I grew up, and Leanne grew up, and you grew up. If you're watching this, everyone here grew up in a time dominated by massive institutions. And those institutions are, in large part, driven by experts who rely on science to come up with their policy recommendations. And they all have as their bedrock the idea that there's a single shared reality with a single set of facts. This is changing. And I'm here to tell you that the age of vibrant, dominant institutions that have ruled our lives for the last 100 years or so, and that have been sort of the main vehicle for the standardization and safeguarding of science, is in its twilight. Instead, we're entering an age of spiritualism, where supernatural beliefs are gaining power over those public processes that currently underpin our society. That's what we'll talk about today. So let's see. Who am I? I'm Matt Hongoltz-Hetling. I'm a journalist and author. I've won some awards. I've written a few books. You'll see here, I sort of have two modes for when I am giving interviews, Zoom type interviews. I can either be on the porch, which is where I am right now, or I can be in my truck. And I have just those two options because I live in a tiny house with two tiny children who have two humongous voices. And this is the only place that I have a shot at getting through an hour of uninterrupted talk. Um, thank you for indulging me on my background. I'm really excited to talk. So over the course of my career, I've looked at a lot of sort of like, fringe groups and out there groups. When I was coming up with this book, I was sort of back-ended into the ghost thing. I was really interested in exploring the biggest issue of our time, which is the decline of institutional trust, how that impacts me, how it impacts you, how it impacts institutions and the science they rely upon. What is the Ghost Lab? I spent 2 years studying the KIT Research Initiative, which is headed by a man named Andy Kitt. He's a scientific minded ghost hunter. And in 2009, Kit assembled an Avengers style team of paranormal enthusiasts. He had a highly regarded psychic medium, an empath who could sense the feelings of others, a paralegal who was looking for an explanation for the voices in her head, and a Bigfoot hunter who also happened to be an alien abductee. So together, these Kit Research Initiative members, KRI members, came together in what I really thought, it really struck me as sort of a noble quest. They wanted to bring science to these fields. They wanted to prove or disprove the existence of ghosts, Bigfoot, aliens, and other supernatural phenomena. And they had all had sort of personal experiences that um, didn't allow them to discount the idea, right? They really sort of lean towards this is real. How can we find real science, actual science, not like what we're seeing on TV, to prove it? Uh, so here's a brief excerpt from my book. According to one online register, nearly 50 different New Hampshire-based ghost hunting groups popped up in 2008 and 2009. One of them was KRI. The actual number is almost certainly much higher. Spirit hunting was so hot that it seemed the state motto could plausibly have been changed to live free or die. And then after you die, meet me in a dark house after midnight and say one or two indistinct words into my voice recorder. Given scant attention by power structures that hold their premise in disdain, KRI and thousands of groups like them are largely, like the spirits they study, invisible, free to roam America's darkest corners in a ceaseless search. It is this endless journey that is subtly reshaping the country, away from a set of centralized, science and church based homogenous standards into a pastiche of provincialism and myth. To understand the ghost hunters, to understand KRI, is to understand America's near term future. But before I talk more about KRI and what its members found, I'd like to talk about science's biggest problem. It's a problem that threatens the process of science itself, and so I describe it as an existential problem. So, here in the 1950s, we see that the public began really funding non military scientific research, beginning around a couple of $1 billion a year, escalating to more than 100 billion. We've spent trillions and we have a lot to show for it. Science was giving us a lot of deliverables, really useful things like quantum dots, obesity drugs, the dustbuster, a sign language dictionary, and LASIK surgery. It also gave us some really useless things, like compiling a documentary on the history of Tupperware or seeing what happens when you give honeybees cocaine. But we'll forgive them their faults for all of the many successes that they've given us. Overall, we're living longer, more comfortable lives. We've benefited from advances in medical science to heal us, agriculture to feed us, technology to give us computers in our pockets, and visits to other planets. Some studies have found that every dollar spent on science generates as much as $70 in social benefits. Here we see the same idea. This tracks the funding, but those flat lines at the bottom show the relative lack of growth in physics research. I don't really have a point here. I just like to imagine the physicists whining about it. Anyway, so At the same time, there's been another trend since the 1950s, and it has to do with public trust. In the 1950s, nearly 80% of the public was all in on government institutions. By 2015, under Obama's second term, it was down to 19%. Today, it's at 12%. The number of people who trust government is smaller than the number of people who think government is run by Satan worshiping, blood drinking pedophiles, according to the polls. The number of people who work for government, that is greater than the number of people who trust government. So this is just on the face of it problematic. How can we expect that the public will give more and more money to something that it trusts less and less? In the early 2010s, some 96% of Democrats. Let's see. I think we can't see this yet because. Oh, okay. I get it. I get it. In the early 2010s, some 96% of Democrats and 99% of Republicans expected their children to go to college. In 2021, just 10 years later, 46% of American parents said they preferred that their children not attend a four-year college. So, what's the toll of that distrust? What did we lose? Due to sort of lack of participation from the public, over the last 20 years or so, we've lost 136 rural hospitals that have closed their doors, 861 colleges, 9,500 higher education campuses, and tens of thousands of churches. So, why am I an atheist talking about churches? It's because I now recognize that churches and scientists are like two lobsters fighting in a lobster tank, and paranormalists are about to eat us both for lunch, right? In this moment, the similarities between church and science are more important than their differences. What church does, like what science does, is it relies upon a sort of standardized playbook of facts of the universe. It doesn't agree with science, but it is overall sort of a unifying, stabilizing force in our country. So this distrust has also created our current political moment in which government agencies are being dismantled. Just a day or two ago, the New York Times reported that roughly a third of publicly funded science research has been halted. So when people lose faith in science, when they lose faith in government, lose faith in the church, lose faith in American corporations, lose faith in colleges, lose faith in the justice system, lose faith in expertise, they don't lose their questions about the universe. They're still curious primates. They just seek out new sources for their information. So, where do they turn with their questions about the nature of reality, the afterlife, morality, the history of the world, their feelings, their mental problems? Well, it turns out Bigfoot is having a better decade than Congress. When I spent time with the believers, I was struck by their provision of societal services. They're actually serving the public in ways that are competing with evidence-based institutions. Their homegrown experts have followers listening to them, and they're coming up with answers about the afterlife, about why you have a persistent feeling of unease in your home, perhaps, about why you're experiencing lost time or voices in your head, about how to make major life decisions, about history, about all of it. So every time someone makes a decision to go to one of these sources instead of an institutional source, science is pushed back a bit further into the sidelines. And the leaders within the believer community or believer influences are increasingly making money for what they do. This started around 2005 with the debut of the television show Ghost Hunters. People loved it. It was a huge rating success, and it's inspired a host of imitators and been part of a broader rise in paranormal-infused capitalism. So here's an example. I'm going to play a video clip here, and if you want to know where folks are turning to answer their questions about the universe, it's people like this. And what you're going to see is some scientific trappings. They speak in the language of science because science still has some cultural cachet. You'll see cameras and equipment, and you'll see a guy with headphones on. So he is operating under the theory that if he listens to sort of like randomly generated white noise and radio frequencies, that the ghosts can sort of control that output into his ears. And so then when he hears a word and repeats it to the other folks who cannot hear that noise, he's sort of um articulating what the ghost is trying to communicate. All right, so part of the point is that the entry barriers to making money at ghost hunting are extremely low. You don't have to take an exam or even be particularly media savvy. These are just sort of like a group of dudes in here doing this thing. The magic ingredient is the capacity to communicate your belief in ghosts, even if you don't sound very good while doing it. Uh, so the guy with the headphones said death. And that kind of just sets up my favorite part of this clip. So that's laughable, right? Um, but consider this. We'll be lucky if this video that we're making tonight gets 1,500 views. They have 1.5 million views on this video. Haunted Tic Tac, hashtag Haunted TikTok has 2 billion views. Hashtag Paranormal has 5 billion views. And then, of course, there are voices out there critiquing the idiocy of these things. Um, here's a fun bit of mockery. Here's someone sort of pointing out the ludicrousness.
Matt, is there audio on this video? Because I don't think we're hearing
Oh,
it.
oh, is that audio not being shared? Oh
Yeah,
dear. Well,
I don't hear it.
well, I am hmm. Well, rather than try to troubleshoot that, did it play on the first clip, Leanne?
No, no, it didn't.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. All right, so folks, I will just blow past this technical difficulty. Thank you so much, Leanne, for pointing it out. And the point is that the folks who are doing this are just sort of running around like nuts, having fun, being sort of amateurish about this stuff, and they're commanding attention far more than the average scientist or scientifically informed presentation will do. This has been the case in recent years. It was also the case in the 1850s during the spiritualist movement, America's first great spiritualist movement, which was inspired by the Fox sisters, who sort of became famous for being able to produce spirit rapping, spirit knocking sounds. And then they eventually admitted that it was done by cracking their big toe. So you can pay hundreds of dollars right now to stay in the same room that Lizzie Borden slept in before she murdered her parents with an axe. Bars and B&Bs are advertising their ghosts. You can buy specialized niche equipment like a teddy bear equipped with sensors and microphones that's designed to speak directly to child ghosts and elicit responses that can be documented. Um, and then they also sort of like have this, they can be an economic engine for a whole community. For example, the town of Waco, Texas built its downtown revitalization plan around the desire of tourists to ghost hunt in an old Dr. Pepper bottling facility. Um, and there are 6,000 ghost hunting groups, 80,000 professional psychics, more than 100 reality television shows, and thousands upon thousands of podcasts that truck in paranormal beliefs. So historical sites are building ghost encounters into their business plans, and this has all created a profit motive that ensures that at any given time, massive numbers of people are financially invested in convincing the public of the reality of spirits, alien, Bigfoot hunters, and so on. It shifted from a worldview to an enterprise. And when it becomes an enterprise, it's a different animal. One of the things that's so sort of poisonous about these beliefs is that once you've seen a ghost or experienced a ghost and you're convinced that it's real, and you've talked to other people who say the same thing as you, then you have to wonder, well, why isn't science finding some evidence of this? Uh, why can't the men in white lab coats figure this out and document a ghost? I can do it in a house with a tape recorder, right? And so their conclusion from that is either A, that science is a horrifically flawed instrument for understanding the universe, or B, that science is corrupted, that instead of trying to find the truth about ghosts, that they're actively suppressing the truth about ghosts or aliens or Bigfoot or what have you. And once you go down that path, then you start to see those publicly funded science projects and initiatives as the enemy, as something that is not helpful for your daily life. Perhaps because of this profit motive, um, these paranormal beliefs are sort of gaining in structure, right? They're amassing organizations that have more sort of a capital and ability to get things done in a more organized manner. That provides some consistency to the messaging. And because of that, there's a lot of people who believe that a pastiche of New Age beliefs are emerging as a new American religion, one that will dominate our culture within 50 years. The raw power of the movement hinges on its ability to tell stories, to create narratives that empower the individual. Unlike science, and unlike the church, which asks the individual to subvert themselves to a higher principle, the dominant wing of the believer community asks higher principles to submit themselves to the experience of the individual. And think about that for a second. They believe that reality is literally formed by a consensus of agreement, that beliefs create facts rather than the other way around. From a scientific standpoint, this is ridiculous. But I think that if you take a moment to think about it, you'll see that the human animal's capacity for emotion based, for reason, does not supersede its capacity for emotion based narratives. Science is special because it's a tool that suppresses our emotional urges and biases. And the scientists who ignore this fact and just sort of expect us all to subvert those emotions and capacity for narrative, they do so at their own peril. Um, so this is, as I've said, sort of one of the reasons why uh, believers are sort of predisposed to fall into places that are antagonistic towards science. So that sort of leads me to ask, well, what can we do about that? Can we science our way out of this? And in the face of this rise of spiritualism, science has, over the last 20 years, debunked, derided, and dismissed these sorts of beliefs. And that's not working. In fact, those beliefs have grown fairly dramatically over the course of my lifetime. And um, it's almost as if when you debunk them, they get stronger. And some studies have sort of like suggested just that. So, can we science our way out of this? Uh, I have a set of recommendations for the scientific community that I think the listening skeptics, will probably hate. But remember what we just talked about. Your emotional rejection of these ideas may not be logical. I myself have taken this position only reluctantly. I think we need to create more spaces within our institutions that provide some level of support to supernatural beliefs. I think we need to fund more research into far fetched phenomena like ghosts. And I think we need to do that by sort of entering into partnerships with some of the more influential ghost hunting groups out there uh, in order to get their buy in. And I think we need to treat people with New Age beliefs with the same level of respect that we might afford to a different religion or culture. So, what does that look like? Let me give you a few examples. Homeopathy. I'm assuming that most of the folks in the audience here know that homeopathy, total bunk, nothing to it. It's based on sort of two principles, neither of which make any sense whatsoever. One is that if a element, some agent, a plant or a mineral or whatever, if they provoke a certain reaction in your body, if they create a symptom in your body, then that element will cure the diseases that also give you that symptom. So if you have a disease that gives you a fever, take some hot red pepper, a bite of chili pepper, because that also can induce a fever in you or a feverish feeling anyhow. So that doesn't make any sense. The other sort of weird scientific principle underpinning homeopathy is that um, they think that the more they dilute it, the more powerful the solution is. And so they sell these tinctures that have been diluted so much that there's not a single molecule of the supposed active ingredient inside it. And they explain this through some mumbo jumbo involving vibrations and energy, as so much in that community does. But despite the fact that homeopathy is bunk, Nevada has a state certified board of homeopathic practitioners. Witchcraft, we know, is total bunk. But the United Nations recognizes the use of witchcraft to curse a community member as a crime. The United Nations has this crime on its books. The idea of being possessed by a demonic entity known as a jinn, which we sometimes in the West call a genie, that's total bunk. But in the Muslim world, medical clinics use spiritual rituals to treat patients for jinn possession all the time. What they do is somebody comes in and they say, "Oh, I've been possessed by a jinn. I'm experiencing or I'm exhibiting these sort of like mental symptoms," and the practitioner will say, "Oh, okay, well, let me call my holy man in here, my Rocky, and he will come in and he will do a ritual that involves writing down some powerful words from the Quran onto a sheet of special paper, and then dissolving that paper in water, which is drunk by the afflicted, while some other important words and steps are taken and said." And in the end, the person who was treated for jinn possession says, "Thank you very much," and pays the bill and walks out the door. So, why do the state of Nevada, the United Nations, and medical clinics in the Muslim world recognize these things? Well, the answer is it's a practical decision, it's a strategic decision. A homeopathic practitioner with a license is agreeing to uphold certain ethical standards within his practice. So he or she will abstain from sleeping with patients. They will, if they get a patient who's got cancer, they won't try to convince them not to see a medical professional. They'll refer them to a medical professional, even as they sell them their bottled water. Um, they are agreeing to make sure that their tinctures aren't poisonous, that there's some sort of product quality or control. And because they do all those things, the homeopathic practitioners who are state certified in Nevada are relatively benign. They're a less toxic force on the public than a less scrupulous homeopathic practitioner might be. The United Nations recognizes witchcraft for much the same reason. It administers a justice system in refugee camps, and some of those refugee camps serve a population where belief in witchcraft is widespread. So having the crime on the books short circuits cases of mob violence. And Muslim medical practitioners, rather, they provide spiritual treatments for the demonically possessed so that the clinician can enjoy a relationship with a patient that will allow for evidence based treatments to also be administered. Maybe in addition to that ritual, take this pill. It's a drug. Here's what it will do to help you. It will also sort of built into that ritual, it Trojan horses in things like continued contact with the patient, which for many mental conditions is critical to that patient's well-being, and also sort of like a peer support system. So in each case, they've taken a natural enemy of science and turned them into a stakeholder of science-driven institutions. So I think we need more of this. I'm sure many of you have heard the NRA slogan: "The only thing that can stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun." Well, I think the only thing that can stop a bad psychic with a crystal ball is a good psychic with a crystal ball. So I think we need to license and certify our 80,000 professional psychics and mediums, as well as the 6,000 plus ghost hunting groups. If you have a ghost hunting group that's in a house and somebody in that house is telling them that there are unexplained fires cropping up, they should be aware to the fact that there might be a mentally ill person in the house setting those fires. They should be able to sort of have some guidelines, some criteria for when an intervention by an evidence-based practitioner might be helpful, and to make those referrals. Um, they should be, held to a standard to show that they don't disturb or distort historical places. So I think we need to develop clinical protocols that can treat medical systems and be consistent with paranormal beliefs. So I talked about the jinn quite a bit. In America, there's no good count, but the counts that have been done suggest that there might be as many as 3 million Americans who believe not just in aliens. A lot of people believe in aliens among us. 60 million Americans believe in aliens among us, but perhaps as many 3 million believe that they've been abducted by aliens. Um, and those folks in America who need help for the trauma that they're experiencing as a result of their supposed abduction are much less likely to go to a medical clinic because they know that they will be sort of laughed out the door. That it's not a friendly environment for the expression of those beliefs. And so in my research, the KIT Research Initiative, one of their most popular programs was sort of a peer support group for alien abductees. It functioned much like an AA meeting, where folks could get up and share their stories and call each other and help each other through the shakes, even though the phenomenon is likely not true. But a lot of folks who experience alien abductions, their symptoms might be, or their experiences might be consistent with um, sexual abuse, might be consistent with addiction, or with any of a host of mental diagnoses. And I think as scientists, I think we sort of tend to get into a reflexive position of don't want to sanction that, right? I don't want to make science impure by giving any license or stepping stool to a paranormal belief like alien abductions. Um, and that keeps science pure, but it also sort of kicks people out of the tent. And we used to be able to just say, well, we're right. And hey, look at all these deliverables. But we're in a new age now. And maybe it's just that people, I was thinking about this just today. Maybe it's just that people have sort of like received a certain level of comfort from science. Maybe they're good now. Maybe the public's sort of attitude is we don't care if science advances, because we sort of already reaped all the benefits that we want. And perhaps that sort of sense of apathy or want of need is helping along these voices for the cutting of scientific research and those sorts of things. Um, and if our medical practitioners had a protocol and our therapists had a protocol that could accommodate that very common belief of alien abduction, then I think uh, fewer of those people would be destructive forces in our society. So science has kicked so many people out of the tent. Now we're looking out and we're realizing, oh, hey, there's another tent and it's bigger than ours and it's more vibrant than ours. And it poses an existential threat to what we're doing over here. So would you rather, you know, what you perceive of as wasting some research dollars looking into a phenomenon that you don't think is correct, or spending money on marketing? Can science market itself and tell those narratives? We do have some great storytellers in the scientific community. No one's ever gonna top Carl Sagan or Stephen Hawking or Neil deGrasse Tyson. But there are there are those people out there who do have the capacity to capture the public imagination. We need more of that, and we need to possibly spend resources creating more of that. And does science have to market itself? Oh, it's such an icky idea. But I think we do. I think if the alternative on supposedly wasting money on those things is to see a third of scientific research in the United States be cut, I think we got to spend some money on some marketing and looking into some things that the public cares about, even if the scientific consensus is that they don't exist. So this will keep the research dollars flowing, allow professionals to serve their patients better. Uh, Historically, there's been sort of a dominant mode of dissemination of scientific information. And this is largely broken down. In the beginning, scientists did what they did just for their patrons, their wealthy, kings and noble folks who were funding them. And then over centuries, they worked very, very hard to sort of create these institutions where there's a barrier between um, the science being done and the dollars that are supporting that science. The government and colleges have been sort of a buffer, but now we are in a place where that is turning against us. That wall that we've built so successfully that has isolated scientists from the biases of the public has now allowed for a vision of science to run amok that is not helpful, that is threatening. So let's see, that is my presentation. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for listening. I am very eager and happy to take your questions. And if you want to reach out to me through other means than this presentation, you can see some contact information for me there. Feel free to reach out.
Matt, thank you so much for your presentation. There
You
is
could
a
hear
lot.
like 90% of it.
What did you say? Yeah,
I said you could
yes,
even hear 90% of it.
we heard 90% of it, which is awesome. And then I will be honest, you had me at honeybees on cocaine. Like that was a study. Like that could be just a whole channel of addicting various species to cocaine other than human beings, because now that's a Johnny Depp movie. Um, I You said so many key things that people, it's the decline in the faith and belief in institutions, and that doesn't stop the curiosity. People just seek their answers elsewhere, which is yay for human beings for still seeking. But wow, you guys were going off into the weeds. Don't do that. This For that way lies madness. um and I was shocked to find out that we have over 6,000 ghost hunting groups. I don't know why we're looking for ghosts. Doesn't everybody have a high school yearbook? I mean, that's where I tend to keep my ghosts. I'm just saying. Um, but I heard you talk about this on another interview, and I was fascinated about the jinn and how in Muslim communities they just sort of integrate it. It's like you come in, it's like, okay, yeah, I have a headache and I'm being haunted by a jinn. Okay, yeah, no problem. like, they heal both, which I find wild because we don't have enough regular medicine to far less to integrate all these teams. But hope springs eternal. I look at it like a belt and suspenders approach, perhaps, that you're going to treat the whole person and not make fun of them. And I wrote down here somewhere about trying to make these people feel seen, like is because they're ridiculed and they won't seek help because they know they're going to be mocked. And what if they weren't? What if we treated them with respect? And look, y'all, I know the folks who watch this show, y'all are jumping up and down. You want to throw your laptop out the window. I totally get it. When I was preparing for this episode, I was a little surprised how challenged I felt, because initially I'm like, these people are nuts. This is this is ridiculous. And the more you say that, it's like telling your teenager you don't like who they're dating. That's just saying, hey, marry them, run off in the middle of the night. And we as suppose it, not suppose it, but skeptics and smart people, there's a big reaction to that. And what you are coming to us with, or in general, the premise of your book is a big ask,
It is.
for
It's sort of revolting.
scientists. Sort of revolting, but interesting. Because we're asking people to look at the data. We're asking people to make more intelligent decisions, and what we're not doing is responding to their concerns, because something happened to somebody. If you are hearing voices, something's going on with you. You've settled on
Mhm.
ghosts, you've settled on jinn, you've settled on something. But like you said, that maybe there should be a protocol where it's like, okay, could be a jinn, could be a ghost, could be migraines. Like, what is that
Mhm.
checklist? And I do not think we have a robust enough system to handle that. But again, hope springs eternal here. Um, I wrote a note to myself that this sounds like the literal combining of science fiction. Not the TV shows that we're used to, but science and fiction, what we think of as fiction that these people truly believe. How do we combine these things? How do we get to the storytelling, the advertising, the we hear you, we don't believe you, but you don't believe us either. And where's our middle ground? Am I summing up what I heard
Yeah,
from you?
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Like
Okay.
I went out and I spoke to, I went into the project thinking like, oh, these people are nuts, just like
Yeah.
you said. And what I found out when I talked to them was like, they weren't nuts, they weren't stupid, they
No.
weren't lying, all sort of like what they had done is they'd had a personal experience that was very compelling to them, on sometimes multiple personal experiences, and
Mhm.
those experiences had been socially reinforced. And in fact, for the lay person who supports science, that's sort of their thing too. They've had oh boy, Ozempic saved my life. My science helped me in this way, science helped me in that way. So they've had a personal experience, and in their social groups, supporting science is cool. It's the thing to do, right? And those are the reasons, those emotions and those sort of like support systems are the reasons that folks both support and oppose science. The quality of the science itself is at its root important. That's the whole ball game. But to suggest that that alone is enough to win the hearts and minds of people, it's just not enough.
Clearly it's not. I was listening to you on another podcast and you said it here too. Debunking hasn't worked. I
Yeah.
mean, if you're playing to, the choir, forgive the reference, everybody, but it's colloquial. You're preaching to the choir. When I've debunked you, this is ridiculous. All right, y'all, we can go home, and that did not fix it. I've got several questions here. Listen, I could spend the entire rest of the time just myself, talking to you and exchanging on this, because it's rare that I feel myself so personally challenged in what I've come to believe and accept, scientifically as a non-believer, as a humanist. And it's not often I get this level of compassionate pushback, which I think is what you're doing.
The nice
Now,
thing
Mark,
about a Zoom presentation is no one can throw a shoe at me through the screen. So let's go. I'm
yeah, we
impervious
don't we
here.
don't have that technology just yet. I'm sure it approacheth. But Mark Tenenbaum, Mark, thank you for your questions, and thank you everybody for your questions. And we will get to as many of them as we can. Wants to know, should paranormal claims be studied in high school science classes? Like they have enough time to do it, but let's again be hopeful. Is this something that should be integrated in the curriculum, do you think?
In my opinion, no. I think, there's a lot, there's sort of wide recognition and so a robust body of evidence that supports the idea that science education works when there's enough of it and when it's out there. So I think like
Yes.
that's not where the failing is. You know,
Okay.
I think the failing is sort of narrow casting to those communities that are into this sort of thing, right? That's the challenge is that um we do those we don't sort of like revise science and the basis of science as a whole from the get-go. What we do is we do sort of like a targeted outreach, and one of the targeted outreaches is through um, public-private partnerships with ghost hunting groups that can apply some actual scientific principles to the things that they're doing, but that is also in some ways grassroots generated from those groups. And I think
Okay.
that is when I say we ought to research these things, that's the sort of thing that I think we do, because then those influential ghost hunting groups on the other end of those projects uh, will be excited that they
Okay.
are doing, quote unquote, real science with real scientists. And I think they're going to be a lot more open to what they're finding. And they're actually going to be sort of pulling their followers in a direction that is, if not wholly uh, an entire embrace, that will at least not be combative.
Okay. And I think this actually leads to Mark's next question. Would science-based public service announcements help counter spiritualism, and who would financially support such PSAs? And I'm put in mind of the more you know. Do 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 do. I'm
Yeah.
definitely dating myself, but yeah, would those work? And uh, the dreaded question: who would pay for that? Since no one's paying for anything anymore.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Those sorts of things are great. That's got to be a part of it. Science PSAs. Um, I think the real challenge is to people have become so inured to messaging, right?
Okay.
The preachers are not going to affect too many people in the middle, right? There's a Dartmouth researcher named Mary Flanagan, whose work I admire quite a lot, and she wanted to come up with a board game, or no, yes, I'm sorry, she wanted to come up with a board game that would change sort of like misogyny in social situations, right? So this is her goal, is to sort of let more people know what is inappropriate in a social conversation. And
Okay.
the game is sort of based on role playing situations, and then somebody says something, and the group is sort of led to a discussion about that topic. She did research. She said, okay, does this game change people's minds? And she found that no, it did not. And the reason it didn't was because it was perceived as too preachy. So what she did
Um,
was she changed 90% of the questions. So now the misogyny questions were only 10% of what was in the box. And that game did change perceptions. So you have to find those sort of sneaky sideways
mhm.
approaches where a good scientific message is embedded inside something else that is not politicized and that sort of doesn't put our natural guard up, like a board game or like a PSA.
Wow. Wow. So you've got to trick people into learning. Now, I'm assuming this was done with adults and not children, because I think, as a child, you get sort of trained into being a little bit more receptive. Like you're used to being taught to or talked at as a kid. But I think we have the delusion that once we become adults, I know everything. I don't need to be lectured. Everyone, I know what I'm doing, which I don't. Wow.
Absolutely.
So, uh, oh my goodness. All right. So, got a couple more here. Thank you again, Mark, for the science-based. Uh, and I would answer that question in terms of who pays for it. I would think it would be,
Mm.
the government, but perhaps I'm showing my belief in institutions when I say that. I'm ill prepared, as I said, for this. I came up with, yeah, the government, the this, the that, the, whether you liked church or not. Oh, I wanted to mention that you drew a comparison between the science community and churches that I've never heard before. Well, I
Mm.
haven't heard it. That does not mean it has not been made, and that you have not made it before when you've spoken. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I don't think we see that Venn diagram a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I think the church is our natural ally in this sort of battle for scientific integrity, and it's sort of counterintuitive. You know, the same forces that are threatening science are also threatening the church. I didn't talk about it that much, but the individual experience that rejects the sort of expert consensus opinion, that same individual experience is also rejecting the established teachings of organized religions, right? So, like,
Mhm. Okay.
they have their own sort of set of experts, religious leaders and clergy, and this is a movement. It's about individualism. Um, the paranormal movement celebrates the individual and it feeds the ego of the individual, and it creates a self-reinforcing narrative of identity, of self-identity for that individual, that is toxic to both their scientific beliefs and to their religious beliefs. And you know why would you listen to your church if your church can't tell you what to do about the aliens who you think are out there, right? If the aliens sort of like aren't on their radar.
Mm, okay.
And religious scholars can sort of try to incorporate here and there as they can, but overall, the same forces of stability that benefit scientific institutions also benefit the church. And this sort of like wholesale fragmentation of the public and of belief systems um, is something on which no institution can stand on solid ground. It becomes shifting sand for every institution, be it a faith-based one or a science-based one.
Okay. I I cannot speak for everyone in the audience, but I don't think I know I'll speak for myself. I've not looked at it that way, and that is definitely a for me,
Uh,
and perhaps
I'm
for
an
some folks in
atheist.
the
Yeah,
audience. So you get it.
yeah.
You get it.
I get it.
Um,
I get it. Yeah, I've been criticizing the church for, my whole adult life. I've been out there, sort of rah-rahing against the church. And the church has a lot of problems and a lot of problems for science, but um, they are not as bad. If you replace everyone's religious beliefs with paranormal beliefs tomorrow, science is in a much worse position than it is right now.
yeah, for sure, for sure. And Instagram, TikTok, social media in general, not helping. We have a question here, and again, I thank everyone for participating. What is your assessment of the risk that state licensing of nonsensical practitioners get perceived by many rational consumers as endorsement of the validity of their practices? And that is a completely legit question.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, are we making them relevant when we do this?
Yes,
Are
yes,
we giving them legitimacy?
yes.
And uh, I will say to you, you are not in a position to bestow or reserve legitimacy from these beliefs. Um, they are in a position to bestow or reserve legitimacy from you, right? Yeah, there's sort of like an assumption that that giving them any sort of rubber stamp of approval is going to help them, but they really don't need the help. They are doing fine. And I think that when you give them that rubber stamp of approval, what you're doing is you're creating a medium where the folks who might be harmed by those sorts of beliefs. Let's take quack medicine as an example, right? Uh, you're a cancer patient. You are not wanting to undergo chemo and the other evidence-based regimens. And so the idea of quackery, drinking bleach water or deacidifying your body, or any of of a whole host of other ridiculous cures, those sound better to you. So science is going to say, okay, I'm not going to do anything about any of those cures, and that cancer patient is never going to walk in my door. They're going to go and they are going to read a book by, Robert Young about the pH miracle diet or whatever, and that cancer patient is much more likely to die. If science has a hand in an alternative healing clinic where that patient feels comfortable going and coming in and can get sort of like um value neutral versions of those medicines, things that are at least benign, that aren't actively malignant, um and can also be introduced to a message in a non-threatening way that will get that person to a chemo session, that is what's going to save that person's life. And I don't think that that robs science of any legitimacy. I think the risk is far greater to see, voting trends that devalue science. I think that that's the greater threat. I don't think that you're elevating those things. You're sort of like identifying what within those fields and those belief systems is acceptable and what's not. Otherwise, there's no way to elevate a ethically minded alternative practitioner. They're just we're painting them all with the same brush, and it's not fair and it's not effective. It's a poor strategy.
Here's Based on what you've just said, I'm wondering how many people find themselves open to these alternatives because they don't have access to actual medical care. I mean, we live in a country
Hmm.
that ties healthcare to employment. We don't have universal healthcare, and there's going to be a whole swath of people who receive less of it, either it being, legislated away, or they're losing their jobs. And so, sure, I'm going to get these crystals if I can't actually get to a doctor.
Hmm.
How much of that? And I know you may not have a number, but I
Yep.
would feel that that's definitely a pathway in for these folks.
Everything you said. Yeah, absolutely. There are more doctors per capita in Kazakhstan than there are in Mississippi, right? 1 in 200 people who board an international flight are doing so to get medical care that wouldn't be legal in the United States, right? So this is an enormous problem, and I don't want to paper over the fact that institutional reform is one way for institutions to gain trust, right? By providing universal health care, for example, by doing something about income inequality. These are things that can provide a more stable life, and then some of those paranormal beliefs do dry up. So yeah, absolutely. A part of the solution has to be greater transparency and accountability within our democratic process.
Okay, we are almost right at the top of the hour, and I want to get to this question here, well, this comment and question, because I always love a compliment wrapped in a question. They said, I finished Ghost Lab today, loved it, also loved Quack. As an emergency physician, clinician, and scientist, I support taking a humanist approach to paranormalists. You can't get anywhere by denying their experiences. Can you tell about how to move science and paranormalists into practical cooperation? Like that that's the whole deal that we're talking about tonight. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for supporting my work and appreciating my books. That's the thing I'm going to remember tonight when I'm falling asleep. So thank you for that. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is, how can these conversations start? And I think the conversation has to start within the scientific community. I think that it was maybe sort of I think basically scientific groups, in short, need to actively strategize and plan for how to solve the problem of waning relevance with the public. And the sort of more specific recommendations that I made today, I think that's sort of a subset of their battle plan. But I think that science is not used to addressing that problem. They're not used to having to sort of like go out and sell the public on what they do. They've been counting on National Geographic and Popular Science to do that for them. And so I think science needs to, they need to have some powwows. They need to have some strategic powwows that will sort of recognize and address this problem systemically. And that then I hope that those folks who do that give a listen to the
Awesome. Well, Matt, thank you again.
incorporate that into the broader recommendations.
Thank you again for your presentation, for your book, for your challenge to the skeptical community. I appreciate that. And to the audience, if you missed any of tonight's presentation, it has been recorded and will be available as always at skepticalinquirer.org. And my thanks to, of course, Skeptical Inquirer, the Center for Inquiry, and of course, to all of you in the audience for choosing to spend your time with us. My name is Leanne Ward, and until next time, thank you and good night. Matt, again, thank you so much. And I once again love your porch.
Leanne, thank you. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure. Hope I get a chance to come see you perform someday. That would be a dream for me.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.